All right, welcome back. We are COMP1115. That's Game Programming 1 in the fall 2025 semester at Georgian, and it is week 9. Woohoo, week 9, part 1 of our broadcast and recording. And let's go into this. Here we are. So, week 9, we're going to be covering methods part 2. We kind of covered methods part 1 last week. What we did was we talked about parameters and return types. We did an intro to Windows Forms last week, and we basically I showed you labels, text boxes, and buttons with some event handling. That's what we did last week. And we talked about the code behind file. We did a little bit of debug write line stuff and some documentation, and that was all part of your in-class exercise 7. Thank you for that. So, as we did last week, this week what we're doing is we're continuing with methods. So we're passing parameters by value. How do we pass them out by value versus by reference? And there's 2 keywords, more than 2 actually. There's 4 keywords we're going to talk about, but the main ones are ref and out. And we'll talk about what those keywords do. They're modifiers to parameters. So they're parameter modifiers. We'll talk about those. We'll talk about what method overloading is. And how we can have default parameters, or sometimes they're also called optional parameters. And we'll talk about the list collection, what that looks like compared to arrays, and we'll do more Windows forms. So lots of stuff to cover today. And like I said, not a lot of time. So to start this off, what I'd like to do, see how my install is going. What I'd like to do is start with last week and what we did last week and what the solution was for last week. What I asked you guys to do, I'm just going to bring up that solution here. What I asked you guys to do last week was, let's bring it up. Build a project that basically did randomized stats. Okay, so that's what it was. So the form kind of looked like when it feels like loading. One day. Kind of looked like this, right? And all I basically did was I said, if you make this form, I gave you instructions on what to do. And I kind of said, like, this is the bare bones stuff that you can do. Something that looks like this. So if you run it, then you should get a Windows pop-up, very crude actually, that kind of looks like this. If I click generate, it'll generate random numbers. That's all I wanted you guys to do last week. Now, some people were very creative, and thank you for that. I really prefer certain creativity, especially when I'm looking at all the code. Haven't finished marking everything yet, but I will get to it. Really, the way we did this was when the button was pressed. We talked about event handling last week and how button events work. So again, we talked about the form itself, and then, there's a few panels we talked about last week. There's the toolbox, the outliner over here, the outline. It's the Solution Explorer you guys know about. Then there's the properties panel. So that's the way your Windows should be set up. And again, a lot of that can be kind of enabled and disabled. It's common, Damien. It's enabled and disabled via the view menu, right? So you can go to view, and then you can go to, if I want to see the toolbox, you can do this, the toolbox. If I want to see the outline, I'd have to go to other Windows document outline. That's for these two. You can also look at the Solution Explorer or hide it, like, with this one. And way at the bottom here, there's the property windows right there. So this is all the windows. These are all the things we need. Some people didn't know where all that was, but I wanted to kind of go through it again. If I want to switch to the code behind file, there's 2 parts of Windows Forms, right? There's the actual design side, which is what you're seeing here. And then there's the code behind file. To get to the code behind file, you can right click on the form and you can go view code, or you can press F7. So if I press F7, then it'll take me to my code behind file. So I asked you guys to put together a random kind of, make it so it randomly generates. And we need to have an event handler. We talked about event handlers last week. It normally what happens is the system generates an event if you double click on something. For example, if I have a button and I double click it, it'll generate the event and it'll be like this. Whatever the name of the button is, in this case, button generate, it'll add on a underscore click because that's the default event for buttons, the click event, right? There's two parts to the parameters. One is the sender, which tells us which thing clicked, which thing interacted with this, interact with the event handler, and then arguments, event args, which is really just like what kind of event was triggered, whether it was a click event, a hover event, one of those kind of things we talked about last week. I asked you guys to put together a simple roll 5d10, which is something we've done before, which just basically generates random numbers between 1 and 10 and adds them together and returns an integer. And then this is kind of what you could do. I also did some debug write lines so you can see what have been generated, but this wasn't required, right? So this is not actually, wasn't part of it, okay? So that's the main, the default. This is kind of the bare bones, what I would ask from you. And then you could have added more stuff. Some people, like I said, they embellish, they add, animations. I saw some people that did things like beautiful backgrounds and stuff like that, and it's fine. So we're going to do another example of that today, right? And we're going to start from scratch again because I want you guys to get more experience doing this kind of stuff. So we're not going to continue with exactly this one, but I wanted to show you this because this is what we did last week. Okay, so was anyone struggling just before we go on? Is anyone struggling with any concepts from last week? Something that they couldn't do, they had trouble doing, or anything like that? Anybody? It's okay to say that. Again, it's this the time to do it because we're going to continue building on what we did last week, right? So I want to make sure that you guys are good. All right. So if everyone's good, I wanted to add to this, kind of stuff, what we had done last week. And what I want to do here, I'm just going to bring up our PowerPoint, is continue with what we're doing. So I want to talk about methods again, and we'll use some examples in Visual Studio to have this done, right? So far we've been talking about is when we pass parameters to methods, parameters are like the inputs, as we're passing into them. We usually pass them by value, typically. And passing by value means we make a copy of whatever we had on the outside and as they pass on the inside. Now, again, it's hard to visualize without actually doing it, but there are some keywords we can use to pass by reference. So there's out, ref, in, and params. Okay, and I'm going to talk about those things, one thing at a time. So if I want to use the the modifier, and again, imagine if I have a method that looks like this. Okay, and the method is called calculate player stats. Okay, and I have some inputs. These are the parameters right here, parameter list, right? And the parameter list has a couple of integers here by themselves. And then we also put the out modifier here in front of the type and the variable name inside of the for the method. And what out signifies is that I'm going to, whatever variable gets passed in, is that there's a connection between the two. Before, when we pass stuff in, we create a brand new variable inside of the method. And it's a copy of everything we kind of, from the calling area. This is sometimes called the caller down here. So this would be the calling thing. When I call or invoke the method, I do it here, right? Let's say, for example, from main, right? So in this example, I have two variables, total score and total lives. And I have a method called calculate player stats. And the first two parameters take in the level and the base score. So here's level and base score. In this case, level 3, base score 1200. And the second two parameters are the total score and the total lives, right? So here we have a calculation of what score is. That's total score locally, right? And here's a calculation of lives. Now, it's a funky calculation, but this is just a contrived example to give you an idea of how this works, right? Notice here that there is no return type. So the return type is void. And yet, the values that we put inside of score and lives inside of our method get captured inside of total score and total lives. So why do we do this? Okay, a couple of reasons for this. Out int can hold more than one int. No. Out is just a modifier on the parameter, and what it allows us to do is return multiple things. Remember that methods can only return one thing ever, right? But with these modifiers, we save the results of score and lives. So again, total score, and I'm just going to draw this out for you as an example, so maybe this will help. But let's suppose I call calculate player stats here on this line, and I pass in 3 for level. So 3 gets passed into level. That's what happens, right? 1200 gets passed in for base score. And then there's nothing to pass in for total score and total lives. If you notice also up here, we didn't initialize anything. Total score and total lives is actually uninitialized, just declared. So we've made space for those in memory, but we haven't done anything with them yet. However, here we're passing in total score and total lives into the calculate player stats method, right? So what happens is we create this connection, and this is kind of like a two-way arrow this time, okay? And this two-way arrow means that anything I do with score here locally or lives gets reflected here in total score and total lives because I'm making this two-way connection. And this two-way connection is possible because of the out keyword, this out keyword right here, and this out keyword right here. Both the method as well as when I call it right here, when I use the method, both places must have the out modifier in front of the parameter. Okay, once I have those two things, it's almost like I'm turning on a switch that allows me to save anything I do within the calculate player stats, in this case method, out to these things. So why do we need it? Why not just have regular return types and so on? It's because when I have more than one value I want to return from a method for some reason, remember every one of these things, whenever we talk new things in C#, they're constructs that are solving some type of problem. So some person down the line, way back in the day, had a problem they wanted solved, and so they changed the language to allow for this, right? That's what it was. Slowly, remember C# and a lot of other languages out there, general purpose languages like this, are evolving. So they change and change as things go on, as more users want more features, things that they want the language to do. Okay, so this is one of those things where we want to pass by reference. Passing by reference is not a new idea. C++ and C, the original language C, they allow you to pass by reference by using pointers, okay? But in C#, we don't use pointers typically. All right, so that's why we use these modifiers. I wouldn't say it's new. I would say out is the solution. The out modifier is the solution for passing by reference. Okay, because again, we can pass by reference in C, and in C just by using pointers. Okay, so that is the first one. So the out modifier. There's also a ref modifier. So again, C#, they have another modifier, ref. Ref is different than out. Okay, so where out did not need to be initialized, again, you can see up here, total score and total lives, no initialization. Ref needs to be initialized. Okay, so this needs to be initialized with a value, like 40 as an example. Okay, and then what it says here is it allows a method to modify the original variable that was passed in, okay? And kind of the same thing that we did before, right? So we can read and change the variable's value, and it's useful when you want a function to update existing data rather than return it. So what that means is similar to out, but different, right? Where out you have multiple things and you want to set up containers. These kind of are like our little containers here in total score and total lives, that I'm going to dump these values. So I'm basically saying I'm going to dump score and lives into these containers, and I must update them. I must update them here. Whereas ref, I may change it if I want. Or I can just read the value if I want. It's up to me, right? I have more control with ref, but I need to initialize it. That's the only difference. The difference is with ref, I must initialize it first. There must be some value there, and then I can read it and do something with it, okay? So that's the difference. It's very similar though, okay? In, this is new. Talk about in C#. Basically what it is it allows us to pass by reference again. So again, I'm not making a copy. I'm passing the actual object by reference. But in this case, it's only going to be read-only. I don't have access to write anything back to the object. I can only read from it, okay? But it is passing it by reference, which means I have direct access to the object as opposed to making a copy. Why do I need to do this? There is another construct that we're going to be learning about in lesson 12 called a struct, okay? And you can see an example of it here, okay? Here's an example of a struct. Again, we're not going to go over what a struct is today in more detail, but I want you to think about this as a custom data type that we're creating, right? Awesome. So a custom data type, which allows us to put in a bunch of primitive and or complex data types inside of it. So for example, enemy is the name of the complex data type. It has 3 properties: name, health, and damage, as an example, right? So enemy name, enemy health, enemy damage, and that's how we would access it, right? With a dot accessor that we've seen similarly used in other places, right? So structs like this, especially for players and for enemies, can get very large with many, many hundreds of parameters, right? So there's no way I want to pass in 100 parameters into a method. Instead, I pass in the entire struct, right? Positive about this is I pass by reference, which means I don't do a big copy operation, especially for games, which is critical when it comes to frame-based, anything we do is frame-based. I don't want to pass, I want to make a copy of the entire thing. It takes too long and takes too much memory, right? Instead, I just point to it. I said, look here, as an example, this is the place that I want you to look for the data, but I don't want you to change it. That's what in does, right? I don't want you to change it. Instead, I want you just to read it. So read-only kind of ability. So again, if I did something like enemy.name or enemy.health or enemy.damage, if I just want to read it, it's all good. But once I try and do something like this, enemy.health is equal to 0, that's not allowed because in is read-only. So again, a third type of modifier that we can use. And finally, we have something called the params modifier. Okay, and what params does is it creates almost like what actually does, it creates an array of parameters. Imagine if I don't know how many parameters I need, right? I want to send in a list of values, but I don't know how many values I'm going to send in. I have no idea. Maybe it's going to be 5, maybe it's going to be 2, maybe it's going to be 3, I don't know. So here's an example of this, where I have some points that I've accumulated, an array of integers called points, right? So here, the first total 1, I want to calculate the score for player 1, and their score is, they've played 3 rounds, and their score is 100, 200, and 150, as an example. So when I take these, I want to calculate the score. It just takes those values. It creates an array of points for those values dynamically inside of the calculate store method, right? And then it loops through each of the points inside of the array and adds them together into total, and that's what we return. Okay, so again, player 1, it would say scored, in this case, 450 points, right? So, or this many rounds. I scored 3 rounds because I have 3 sets of points as an example, right? And then calculate score for player 2. There's only 2 of them. So it would say player 2 scored 2 rounds, whatever it is. And the total points would be 800, as an example. So again, I can vary the amount of things. I don't know how many parameters I need in this case for my methods. Maybe player 3 is going to have 6 rounds, and they did. So instead of doing it other ways, again, this is the params modifier solves some problems, right? Again, I wouldn't say you want to use params a lot. I think it's there for us to use sometimes when we don't have another solution. Sometimes what I prefer is using ref and out and in. I think those are really good. Params is just really another way of setting things up. But remember, this is not passed by reference. This is passed by values. I'm actually taking these values, passing them in, calculating stuff, and it does return something. In this case, it returns an integer. Okay. So that is params. Okay. We talked about very briefly last week this idea of a method signature. Okay. And the method signature is something that kind of identifies a method. There's a couple things we can do for this. Okay. So the first thing is a method signature is comprised of its name. Okay. In this case, attack is the name of the method signature, right? These things have method, the attack name. Okay. As well as its parameters and the parameter order. It's very important. So example, these attack, and attack are 3 different methods with the same name, okay? One of them takes no parameters, okay? So imagine if I just pass in an attack with no parameters, then it'll have a different body, a method body, than the other ones. It's almost like 3 different solutions. This is really great when doing things like vectors. Here's an example. What if I want to pass in 2 floats, x and y, right, for a vector, as an example. Or I can pass in a float array for a vector, right? Both can represent a vector as an example. And no matter which one I do, I can have multiple methods, same name, but different, kind of parameters. Not bad idea. So it gives us flexibility into how we work with data. So here we have 3, and one of them has a string, one of them has nothing, the other one has a string and an int. So the question that you should have is, how does the system figure out which one of these things to use if they all have the same name? It really depends on how you call them is the answer. So if I call them with nothing, it uses the one with nothing. If I call them with just a string, it uses this one. If I call them with a string and an int, it uses this one. So depending on how we call them, that's which one it's going to use. So this is method overloading. Okay. You're also going to learn in the future, most likely next semester, about method overriding. 2 different things. Okay. Method overloading means and you're going to see a lot of times when we look at Visual Studio. So if I go back to Visual Studio for a second, and I start typing in something like, debug dot whatever, write line, you might see something like, let's show you this right here. So if I go debug dot write line, and if I kind of do one of these, notice that there are a bunch of different signatures. Take a look at that, right? So these are all different signatures for debug write line, right? That means this method is overloaded, right? I have, a bunch of different methods here. So string with these different signatures, right? These are the 3, 4, or 5. It looks like 5 different signatures. And for each different signature, it has different values. That's what it looks like, right? The same name of write line, and it tells you this. It says +4 overloads. If you actually look at a method, a lot of them that's built in, 4 overloads, which means there's 4 different ways you can use debug.writeLine. Okay, 4 overloads, kind of cool. All right, so that's what it does. So the system helps us with this as well. default parameters. So what if I don't want to have all of this mess, you know, attack, attack, attack? What if I want to write this differently, you know, as an example? Well, I could do that with default parameters. So C#, but not Java, right? And some other languages allow you to actually, in the method, you know, kind of definition, right? Here's the method definition right here of spawn enemy, allows us to use values to actually give these variables values when we declare the method. So that means, like, let's say, for example, I declare a method called spawn enemy, where my string type, the type of enemy is goblin by default. This is the default enemy. So if you don't say anything, then we can have the goblin is what you're spawning. If I'm making a monster spawner as an example, right? And the default level, if I don't specify a level as a developer, is 1. So I kind of spawn a low level goblin as an example, you know, by default, okay? Because I have values here. Now I can just do this, right? Where I say, okay, I want a drone now, right? So I can override the name, right? Where I pass in a value for the name, the type as an example, or I can do both and be very specific. And I have, these are considered optional values. Level as in specify the scene in Unity. No, level as in the level of power, tier, whatever you want to call it, of the drone, not the level as in which level, right? Okay, so that's kind of like the way it can work. So I've presented to you different options now for parameters, for modifiers for parameters, as well as different things. Now, I know we're just talking about them, okay? Like, I mean, straight up, I'm not going to expect you to remember all this unless you use them, but I want you to know that they exist, right? Because that's part of it. The main thing is we don't know when we start coding. And when we get into it, the challenge is, like, you know, you're like, how do I do this? A lot of times it'll give you a solution, and it'll tell you, you know, whether you're searching on the web or using some kind of tool or whatever, it'll give you, you know, some solutions. And you need to understand what those are and what they can do for you. Okay, and that's what we're going over right now. So without further ado, I'm just going to go here. Without further ado, what I'd like to do instead of waiting is I want to start off our project for today. Okay, so I've got the other project open here, but I want to make another one anyway. So I'm going to right click. Sorry, I'm going to go to our folder where I have all my projects, COMP1115, and I want to make a new one there. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio. Let's do this together, guys, so we can spend some time doing this as opposed to just watching me. I'd rather you do with me. And I want to make a new project. So let's do this. Make a new project. Create a new project. I'm going to wait for you guys. It's going to be a Windows Form app because we've gone away from console. Console, we're done. We're not doing console anymore. Okay. And clicking the Windows Form app is what I want here. These are the recent project templates, or you can look for at the top here, Windows Forms, right? Windows Forms app. Make sure that you filter on C#, please, because you can also do Windows Forms with Visual Basic, and we're not using Visual Basic, so that would be a fail. Don't do that, please. Use C#. That's the one we want to use. By the way, there's also other things we can do with C++, but that is, again, is not what we want. Okay, so we want to use C#. There we go, Windows Forms. And then click Next. Let's call this ICE 8 because this is the one we're going to, you know, do for today. And I'm going to click Next here. I'm going to accept the .NET 8 long-term support version. There's other versions perhaps that you've installed as well. We don't need anything else right now, but long-term support or LTS version is typically what we always want to use. Then click Create, okay? And this is going to create a blank Windows Form application. Last week, what we did was we renamed the form a couple of different ways, and it screwed some of us up. Whenever we kind of generated something, we, you know, we're messing around trying to make things go the way we were. I want to rename this form straight off the top, right? this form1.cs because form1 doesn't make any sense. It has no meaning or context. So I want to rename the form. How do I do this? Can someone help me out? And I want to rename it so it doesn't break stuff. How do I do it? Because this is where some people had questions. I had some questions come my way. They're like, I don't know how to rename the form. How do I do that? Anybody? So here's your project, right? And I want to rename the form. How do I do it? You go over to Solution Explorer over here on the right, right? You right click on form1.cs. Be very careful. Right click on form1.cs and you select rename right here, okay? When you do not rename the .cs part, okay? Just the form part. So where it says form1, let's call this selection form for today, okay? Selection form. And press enter. It's going to ask you, you are renaming a file. Would you also like to perform a rename in this project of all references to the code element form1? And the answer is always going to be yes. Please do that. Yes. Now my form is called selection form. Okay, again, this is important to note. Selection form. Okay, very good. On the left, on the outliner, you can also see that selection form, which is of type form, is here as well. This is the overall container that will contain all other controls. Next, I want to put this up on GitHub. Okay, so what we talk about normally is we can, on the bottom here, and again, I want to make sure that I'm not blocking this way. I want to kind of hang this way. On the bottom here, actually, I'll move my webcam around on the video so that way you can see it better. There we go. I'll move myself over there. On the bottom over here, you're going to see this add to source control way over here. Right here's the bottom, add to source control. Again, I'm just going to outline it for people because they keep on forgetting that it exists. This part right here, here, okay, right here, add to source control, right? This part is what we want to use. People were confused when I said, hey, I want to create my, my git ignore and all that stuff. And where do I go? It's here. So I click onto this and I go to git. And when I do that, I can go to local only, right? So you'll see a menu that looks like this for a Git repository. This is a, sorry. Yeah, leave those alone, those blue locks for now. Go to local only, right, as an example. And then in local only, it shows us that, my git ignore template is default Visual Studio. It tells me the local path. License template, we're not going to have anything. And add a README file, for now, we've been ignoring this. Okay, so let's click create. What this is going to do, it's going to make me save. What this is going to do is create a git ignore and a git attributes file in your folder. To see what folder you're looking at, again, remember we're working within this folder right here, and you can see that there's a couple things that we get. All right, again, this is just so you get all this information. There is a hidden.git folder. The hidden.git folder is what keeps track of all your git commits and such, right? As well as your remote information. And how do we do the remote? Their git ignore and git attributes file just got generated from Visual Studio. You need these, otherwise we can't do git commands within Visual Studio without them being locked up. Okay. So once we've done this stuff, the next step is for us to connect this up to GitHub. So let's do that. So I'm going to go up on GitHub, and in my case, it's GitHub Georgian College. I'm going to click a new one. I'll make a new GitHub repository, and I'm going to call this comp. You can call it differently, but COMP1115 in the fall 2025 semester, and it's ICE 8. I'm going to make mine public, but you should make yours private as always, and include me as a collaborator. That's required. Okay. And it asked me, do I want to change some of this? The answer is no. and I'm just going to create the repository. What it's going to do is it's going to give me steering instructions, and I'm going to take all of them this time. I didn't rename my branch. I'm going to get, these instructions are going to do it for me. So I'm going to copy these instructions here, go back to Visual Studio, right? Here's my Visual Studio, and I'm going to go to View Terminal, which is going to bring up my terminal window. And then from here, I'm going to right click, which is going to paste all the stuff from GitHub. And then I'm going to press enter. And when I do so, if I'm successful, it'll push my project to GitHub, right? So now if I look back on GitHub and I refresh, you can see a couple things here. I've got my project that looks like this, right? As an example, I have 2 commits. These 2 commits came from Visual Studio, and I can continue on with the stuff that we're doing now. Okay, by now this is like rote. You should be able to do this in like no problem, because we've been doing this stuff from the very beginning, and it's week 9, right? So you should be much more comfortable with Git and GitHub. So here we are. Notice also at the bottom right corner, and I'm going to shift myself back on the video, but in the bottom right corner now, the name of your branch is here. Okay, there's the name of the branch right here. And it has main as the name of a branch. See that right there? Main. So that is the name of the branch, and it was originally master, right? But when we did this command right here, right, branch -m main, this renamed the branch to main from master. That's what it did. Okay. All right. Again, a little bit of a review. I think it's always good to do a bit of a review for those people who forget stuff like that, and it's totally fine if you do. But it's good to know these things for your exams and tests. All right, so back to this. So now that we've done this, we can start adding to this form, okay? Last time what we did was we had a bunch of stuff. I'm gonna go back to my previous project, and it kind of looked like this, right? Now, you'd be forgiven to think that I can copy between 2 projects. So if I actually did something like this, I'm going to show you this now. If I, let's say, selected all these, again, I don't expect that you have this project up right now. But let's suppose I have the stuff that I had from last week, week 7, right, or week 8, and I7, I had all this. I copy it. Let's say I right-click somehow and I copy it. And then somehow I expect if I go to the other project to right-click and paste, you'd want to make it work. Notice how that worked, right? So this is actually a really good thing that we can do it. You might think that that is not possible, but actually it is, right? So it's kind of cool. So how did this work? How did this, now the copy didn't happen exactly. Like you can see that it's kind of on top of things and whatever. I can undo this and I can make my page wider and do this copy. And I'll give you this information in a second. I'll show you how, I'll tell you how to do it. So here it is. So here's my stuff from last week. Now this does not include any code, just the user interface piece parts, if you will. So if you had last week's in-class exercise 7 and you wanted to make a copy, and it copies these things right here, which is very handy, right? But again, if I was to right-click and go to View Code, you're going to see that there is no code for right now. It doesn't copy the code over. You have to do that, okay? What does it do from a design perspective? If I go to Selection Form Designer, you can see what it's done. It's actually added in these pieces, right? So it's done all the heavy lifting for me in terms of positioning and styling. All that stuff got preserved. So what did it really do, right? Again, I just copied. All I did for people who want to see this, I'm going to actually copy this and see what happens. If I paste this here in my chat, can I do that? Can I paste? So if I was to do something like copy here, and if I paste it in our chat, does it allow me to do it? The answer is no. It won't allow you to paste it like that, but it does recognize from one form to the other, right? Here's another way. If you can't get yours to paste because it doesn't work for you, right? Sometimes Control V won't work either, depending on how you're set up at home, as an example. Here's something you could try as well. I'm just going to erase these things. So let's suppose I wasn't successful, kind of thing. I'm going to go back to my my new form here, my select form. Here's my select form, and I'm going to just get rid of all this now. So the stuff I pasted, I'm going to get rid of it. Bye bye. right? Because I want to show you another way to do this. Here's another way to do it if you want to keep some of the stuff you did last week, okay? If I go to my previous project from last week and I go into the start form designer, this is from last week, I have some of these things here. So what I can do is manually paste this plus everything inside my initialized component. So, okay, now bear with me. I'm going to give you all this on chat, and I want you to try it from my stuff. Okay, so here's something I can do. So I'm going to take all this. This is the initialized component, as well as up to here, right, to the end region. Okay, and what I want you to do is I want you to try replacing everything from your initialized component with my stuff. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to put it inside the chat, and this is it. Now, does it allow me to do it? It does not, because it's too big. Let's see what I can do with maybe a notepad would be something that I can do. I can't do it because our little chat box isn't good enough. But let's try with a notepad. Actually, you know what the best thing to do is? I can give you the whole start form designer. I wonder if I can do that. There it is, right? So you should be able to see that. There's my start form designer from, I know, but I don't want to use Discord since we're on Zoom. So here it is, start form designer. So there it is. So now what you can do is, I don't want you to double click this. I want you to download this thing I just put on chat. And if you download it, you can open it up with a text editor and you'll see all this stuff, the stuff that I made. So you can quickly scaffold out an old user interface based on the one that you've already done without making all those copy changes operations that we did last time. You know, we would have to go through and modify and rename the project, and it was a bunch of headaches, right? We definitely don't want to do renaming here in Windows Forms. Windows Forms, I always think about Windows Forms as being built on stilts. You make a change, like a renaming, and then it breaks everything, right? So so here's my solution. So I would do this if it was me. If you have yours from last week and if you want to retain your user interface, parts of your user interface, not the whole thing perhaps, I want to grab all of this, right? This is from my start form. And then I want to go to my new project and I want to go to my selection form. And all I want to do is I want to replace my initialized component function and this whole thing with the stuff I just copied, like this. Okay. Now notice that there is a missing button generate click event. All right, because remember the button generate click event is what I had. So just comment that out for now because we don't have a button generate click event, right? But if you save and if I go back to my selection form designer, suddenly I have the exact copy of my user interface. And this is very handy again. So it's a lot easier for us to carry forward with user interface designs as opposed to try and redo all that, especially if you spend a lot of time doing that, okay? So I think it's important to learn how to do. And move that back and lock it up. There we go. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So that is the main thing. So why do I care about this? If I go back to my selection form, you know, as an example, so here's my selection form, and my selection form now also says start form at the top because it also took everything about the form as well, right? Damon says, am I allowed to clone i7 to make i8? That sounds easier. If you like. If it's easier for you. But I'm showing you different things, Damien, so that way you have more flexibility with what you're doing. It's not easier, actually. This is far easier and I'll give you more knowledge on how to do things. All right, so I don't want to change the form title here to my new form to selection form. So this is my new form now, my new project. So here it is, selection form. You can see that this title changed, and I want to reorient all of these variables here and my text boxes. I want to reorient them inside of a container. Okay, so that's what I want to do. So first of all, let's move this around. I just want to move this over here for now, right? And what I want to do is I want to reorient these so that instead of horizontal, I want them to go vertical. I'm keeping my other project alive right now because and open because I might copy some stuff from there in a second. Okay, but for now, what I want to do is explore a new construct here, which is in the containers category in the toolbox. Please go to the containers category in the toolbox. There is a panel container. There's a panel right here. I want you to drag and drop a panel onto your new selection form like so. Okay, it creates this box. Okay, again, be careful not to double click. You could if you really want to. There's some events that you have here as well. All right, but please don't do that. You don't need any events, so be careful not to do that. You can expand this using the control handles. And what I want to do is I want to take these values and reorient them. So I want to put agility here. I want to just redo them. Okay, so I want to kind of put these there, strength, and then just do it so that they're oriented in a different way. We still have the user interface parts. We don't have to make new forms. We have our styling, whatever styling you decided to use last week. You can still have those, right? You may have to redo things. If you're very fancy, you may have to redo some of that because, again, I'm going very basic. You might be more fancy than me, right? And you can see now what I have is I've reoriented these objects. I want to make them even, so I'm going to select all of them, all the boxes here, like so. And then at the top, you can see that there is a make horizontal spacing equal button way at the top up here. For those people who don't really see that, it's inside of this toolbar right here, this toolbar up here, right? There is this button that I'm looking at right here, right? And this is what I want to do here. I want to make equal spacing happen kind of in there, all right? The horizontal, yeah, you have to kind of put, it's from the first one to the last one. That's what it is. So if you have like, you select the first one and the last one, then it'll, all the ones in between will space out in equally. So if I move this last one over here, then it'll space all those ones in between. But I want to use this, and then I want to click this button, and then it kind of spaces them out. And I want to do the same thing for these ones. So I kind of want to use all those, and then make sure that it's all evenly spaced, and click this button. And now you can see that they're all evenly spaced as well. If you don't like these, the way they're set up, and I don't, right? Right now, these are automatically, they're using auto size. So again, if you look here on the right-hand side, right on the bottom, on the right-hand side in the properties window, you can see that auto size is true. See that auto size is true. We can turn auto size to false, right? And when we do that, we can size up our labels as well. So let's try that. So let's try, I've selected all the labels, and I'm going to change this from true to false. And suddenly now I have control handles on every one of these labels, and I can make them so that the labels match the boxes below them so that they have the exact same dimensions for the most part. And why this is good is because I can then change the orientation, the alignment of the text inside the label so that it is centered, right? So again, a lot of control. So again, if I click all these ones here, just the labels, they're all the same. And because they're all the same type of control, then I can modify them all at once here in the properties window, right? So back down here, what I want to do with these is I want to change the text alignment. So if you see text align is top left, I can change this to center, right? And you can see that that would be center, center. It'll center the labels, so it's nicely apportioned there. And that is pretty good. So now what I can do is I can select all these again, select all these, and then I can move them down a bit, right? So inside of this box. And I want to put another label up here, which is kind of like, that says secondary attributes. I'm going to copy this one. I'm going to take agility, copy paste. It's going to give me the same styling as the agility is. And up here in the top, I want to rename this label, right? Hold on a second. I'll tell you what I'll answer your question in a second. I want to change this label to label primary attributes. There it is, label primary attributes. And I'm going to change what it says instead of it being, instead of it saying agility, it's going to say primary attributes. And I want to expand this to fit, so you can see that it's going to fit, uh, what that is. So it's going to be a little box that says primary attributes that's kind of put together. I can make the box a little smaller, so it's a little bit nicer and kind of more huggy. So it hugs the items a little bit more. And then even bring this down a bit because I want to make it a little tighter. I think the box is too big. Again, you can actually maybe move it up. Notice that the box expands to fit. So again, I'm just going to move these things up just a touch here and move this here. And now I can move all of them at the same time, which is kind of cool because they're inside of this panel. That's what they are. The panel doesn't really have a name. I'd like to give it a name. This is going to be the primary panel, primary attributes. So I'm going to, again, here's what it looks like in the outliner. If I click on the panel itself, I can go to the name of the panel and change this to capital P panel underscore primary attributes. So you can see that I've done that, and you can see that what it does. Inside the outliner, also, all of the things that I've dropped into this box, this container, I can collapse now. So you can see that it helps me with the outliner here as well. All right. Again, Damien, all I did was I selected all the labels by using control left click. And once I did control left click, then I had all similar properties on the right hand side in the properties window can be modified for all labels all at the same time. Can't copy the form over. Again, Will, what I recommended is I gave you, if you kind of look further up in the chat, I gave you the start form designer. And if you replace, not the entire thing, but if you just replace what I did was I replaced the initialize component method, this whole method, and I added all of these, right? These things here that I added, then you have, once you've taken these things from the file I kind of gave you, then you can really recreate the user interface that we have. All right, so now what we have right now is we've put all the primary attributes in a different orientation here on the form, and we have this container, which is kind of really cool. There's a little arrow. A lot of containers and controls, if you notice, have a little arrow here, right here, right? And if you click on the arrow, it has some options. Now, doc and parent container, I'm not going to do, but I'm just showing you that it has some of these things, even the, text boxes have a little arrow, again, where you can actually add in different options. So keep track of that arrow. Sometimes it appears for different controls. All right, let's try this thing out. Let's try this thing out here. And if I press play, then we should be able to see that the form now looks different than what we had before, right? So there's my form. You can see that it kind of is up here like this. I also want to change the border style of my primary attributes panel. And the way to do that is to go to border style here. So there is a border style attribute. Right now it's none. I want to use fixed single, but you can use none if you want. And now I have a little border. So again, if I was to press play, now you can see that the form is starting to come together. I can see the kind of attributes that I have. And let's just go here and move this around. So again, I can move all the attributes around at the same time. I can put them a little higher and to the left. And this is kind of the first thing that I want to do. The generate button, I want it to work, right? So for now, okay, if you get a build error, just check to see what's causing the build error. A lot of times it's because you might have in your designer, remember I had this, Zach, right here, where I had this extra part in the button. You can see all this stuff here has been kind of put together. But in the button, I had commented out, I had commented out the event, right? Sometimes that's what it is. Notice that when I've moved things around, the designer, which is dynamic, has already commented out or removed that for me, which is cool. Well, that's okay. If you double click, remember what you can do right? Even if you did it by accident, if it's the form that you clicked, then if you click on the little lightning bolt on the right, you can see any of the, let's suppose I, by accident, double click the form. So if I double click the form, it'll give me, sometimes it'll give me like, a, an event, right? That kind of happens inside the selection form, right? Or it just breaks, like it just won't work. So if I look here in the designer, what it actually did is it added in a reference to the selection form load event. So you can just take this away, okay? So that's what you have to do. Or if it added in additional things, like let's say, for example, you double clicked on the generate button and it gave you the generate, kind of thing, and you didn't want that, then again, you can go into the form itself. You'll see that there's a error, or you might see this thing here, right? This is the event. Just remove it and you're good to go, right? And then you can remove the other stuff. Okay, so that is the event. And what I want to do here is, so now that I have this thing, I want to make this generate function work, right? Can't get rid of the error page, so I can't edit it. You can get rid of the error page. The error page is generated because of stuff that the designer is looking for that you've either deleted or things. So make sure you look in the designer and see if there's any errors and address those errors. That's what's causing the thing to malfunction. All right, so I want to put in the code behind file now. I want to kind of create that generate click event. All right. So remember what it should look like. If my button is the button generate, then button generate click is what I want to create. So if I did that, if I go back here, I want to make a new event, which is going to be private void, and then it's going to be called button underscore generate underscore click. And it's going to have those two pieces, which is going to be the sender, right? That's what I want in there. Remember the sender piece and the other parts. And if you forget, again, you can always look back at your previous code, whether it's here or online on GitHub, right? Because you have that access. And you can see we want an object sender and event args e, this part right here. In fact, you can probably just copy all these if you want to make it work the exact same way. So let's do that. Okay, and I'll give you this code in a second for you guys to have the same as me. And then the last part is this part, this roll 5d10, which is just another method that I want to use. We also need random, this part right here. This is the random part. And here is the stuff we have. So if you want to do what I have inside of your form, then I'm going to give you all this. I'm going to put this on the chat, and then you can see that this is what I've got in my code, right? Now this is because my button is called button generate. So if you called it something else, then you'll have to change the name. Now my button generate doesn't do anything because I don't have an event inside my form designer, right? I removed it. So how do I add it? If I go back to my design side, and if I double click on my button, it's going to generate my event, right? Then I should, and I mean I should, be able to run this code. And if I do, without any build errors, right? Okay, so it says button generate click 1. So this is where the error comes from sometimes. So it's looking for button generate click 1, right? But meanwhile, I want to generate button generate. You can just change this to whatever you want. There it goes, button generate click, right? And because that's what I called it here. I called it button generate click. And you can match whatever it says in the designer with the stuff that you have in your code behind file. Pretty simple. So if I press play now, you can see that it runs. And if I press generate, it's going to generate those random values like we had last week. This is where we were last week. So what I'm going to do for me is I'm just going to go back over to you and see how we're doing. I'm going to pause and put this up on GitHub, right? So and then I'll come over and see if I can help some of you out. So terminal, and I'm going to say git commit -m, and we'll say something like reused, UI components for ICE 8. That's all I did. I just reused or repurposed them, if I will. and push. So this one, I have all the stuff from, last time that I have here. It's here, and I'm good to go. All right. I don't need my other i7 anymore. I've kind of raped it for everything I can get. I'm sorry to say it that way, but I really have kind of taken everything I can from this that I need. I don't need this anymore, so I'm just going to close this project down. Okay. Um, and what I'm going to do now is I want to see if I can help one of you out. So I'm going to, right, I'm going to, I'm going to ask you guys again, how are we doing? Right? Are we still up to, so you're still broken? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my sharing for a second, and I'm going to allow you guys to share, right? So there we go. And if I can get, Zach, if you want to share your screen, and then what I can do is do that. Now this is being recorded, but it's okay. What I'll do is instead, it's 9 o'clock, and I've kind of talked for about an hour. Let's take a break for me to help some people out to catch up. And when I come back, what we'll do is we'll continue.